get started, okay? So first off, yeah, so thank you guys all for joining on today. I'm really excited. I got something cool. I got a really good question that I think is going to be fun for us to talk about. And our experiment today too is pretty easy, and it's one that you can do at home, definitely, if you have these ingredients. I say ingredients, not really ingredients. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen with you all, and we're gonna get going and see what we learned today. This is actually a two-part question, so there's a little bit to go here. Okay. So today, guys, we are looking at what was the first animal and what differentiates species. Okay. Maybe you guys think, oh, I know the first animal is my dog. Not so much. There are actually a lot of animals that came before that. So we're going to kind of talk about some of those animals.
What it is. I know the answer.
What's your guess? Let me hear your guess.
Simple bacteria and stuff like that.
Yeah, so we'll talk a little bit about that. You're right about it, but it kind of starts to, when you're thinking about animal, it kind of gets more complex. So let's start right here, guys. We're going to start with the very beginning with Earth. Now, Earth was a rough place. You wouldn't have been able to or like to have lived on Earth at the very beginning of time, which is, when we consider that, we consider about 4 billion years ago. The reason is there were very few living creatures on Earth. Now, does anyone know why there were very few living creatures on Earth 4 billion years ago? Any guesses?
I have one.
Yeah, let me hear it.
It's probably because the Earth started out as like a magma and fiery ball. Yes.
Yeah, partially. Really, the reason it comes down to it, it's based off of that, but the atmosphere didn't have a lot of oxygen. We had a lot of methane, which, remember, actually with the Bermuda Triangle, we were talking about methane. It's a gas. Our environment had in the atmosphere, like that kind of bubble around Earth, there was lots of methane, but there wasn't a lot of oxygen. And that is a problem, right? Because all living organisms, we breathe oxygen. Plants release oxygen, but for the most part, like real life requires oxygen. It's very important. So the only organism that was technically, and this is going back to that point that I forgot who it was they just made, the only organism that was technically alive at the time were microbes, okay? And microbes are single-celled modern-day bacteria. So that's kind of what we'd be seeing right in this middle picture, this purple thing, this green thing, the red thing. Those are tiny. They're one cell. And remember, your body, your skin alone is made up of trillions and quadrillions of cells. There are so many cells in your body, and we're looking at a single cell. Those were able to survive, these bacteria. And the reason that we know this, you might be thinking, well, wait a minute, we didn't have, Google to record these things or to take pictures or whatever. The reason that we know this happened is because of mineral rocks. And this is what this guy is holding over here. That's a mineral rock. And microbes, what happened is they actually ended up pulling together a lot of different minerals, and rocks are made up of minerals. So when we look at rocks, we're able to find those microbes inside of it, and we're able to then date how far back those microbes existed. So it's pretty interesting science there, looking at rocks. Okay, so now we're going to talk about this little guy known as cyanobacteria. And this is important, and you might be thinking, well, you talked about microbes. What's cyanobacteria? What's the difference? So this was about 2.4 billion years ago. So our last slide, this is 4 billion years ago. Now we're at 2.4 billion years ago, so a little bit closer to modern day. There was something called cyanobacteria that emerged. And we're not really sure how or why it came into existence, but it did. Okay, scientists haven't been able to pinpoint exactly why cyanobacteria bloomed. But really, guys, you have all, I'm sure, seen cyanobacteria. It's algae. Have you ever seen a lake or an ocean with lots of green? Yes. Yeah, that is algae. And algae is made up of cyanobacteria. It's the exact same thing. They're one and the same. So there's tons of cyanobacteria here because you see those like really long green strips. Now, here's the deal, guys. Cyanobacteria is the reason why you, your dog, your cat, your parents, why we all survive on Earth. You can thank cyanobacteria. So when you go past a lake, you could say, thank you, Thank you, cyanobacteria, because here's why, guys. These were the first photosynthesizers. And what does that mean? Well, what that means is that photosynthesizers. Yeah, would you want to go ahead? Yeah, go ahead.
It means like how plants eat, breathe, and drink.
Exactly. It's how a plant functions. And photosynthesizers, we have to eat food to live, right? We have to eat plants, eat animals, whatever. Cyanobacteria make their own food because they are technically a photosynthesizer. So what they use is they take in some sunlight. They end up taking carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, not oxygen, carbon dioxide, and water from the ground. They mix those ingredients together, and as a result, they produce their own food. But as a byproduct, they also release oxygen. Okay, so while they're making their own food, they end up releasing oxygen. And even though they don't use oxygen, we need oxygen to survive. It's very important. You wouldn't be here if there weren't oxygen. So cyanobacteria are really important because they lived in the ocean and they ended up giving the ocean a little bit more oxygen, which is exciting. That means that now more complex life can form, right? And here's the thing, guys. When we look at the big picture, cyanobacteria in the ocean, now these guys, they obviously live in water. They didn't contribute that much oxygen, but it's a really good first step to saying, hey, now we have more oxygen and now we can have more life and more complex forms of life than those little microbes. All right. Any questions so far? No? Okay. Next slide. Now this is where things start to get exciting. Now you're thinking, well, Ava, this is a really cool story, but didn't life get more complex? Didn't we have animals and like crazy stuff? Like it wasn't just these cyanobacteria. And you're right. So microbes are all unicellular. And I said that they're only one cell. But animals, by our definition, have multiple cells. And it's important to understand how did these multicellular organisms come to be. So let's talk about this though, guys. Why are we multicellular? Why did life evolve so that we now have trillions of cells? What's the benefit of it? Doesn't it just like more cells, more work? Not necessarily. There's a couple of reasons. The first one is this first picture up here, guys. It's called specialization. And what that means is your skin cells are different from your muscle cells, which are different from your hair cells, which are different from your brain cells. These are all different things. And if you think about it, it's almost like if I said, hey, I want you to go bake a whole cake. Okay, it might take you a little bit of time. Now, if I said, hey, I want you to put flour in a jar, and then the next guy is going to go put sugar in that flour, and everybody has a certain job, oh my gosh, you're going to get it done so much faster, right? So by allowing our cells to specialize, to focus on one job only, it makes the whole organism more effective. And it means that the whole organism can do more things. It's kind of like the pit crew. You know, when you think about maybe NASCAR, if any of you guys have seen like driving, those race car drivers, they don't drive. They don't get out of their car, change their own tire, right? They have a whole crew that does it for them, so it makes things go faster. And that's the idea with cells, is that some cells do the driving, some cells do the tire replacements. Every cell has a different job, and it helps us to make us more effective. Another reason that life got more complex when we moved to having more cells as opposed to a single little cell over here is because parents and babies would look the exact same if we stayed with unicellular organisms. If you think about this, right, the babies of unicellular organisms are just clones of their parents. We go from an orange to an orange. They can only clone. And because there's only one parent that's needed to produce the baby when we're talking about unicellular organisms. So what happens is, guys, our society then will be filled with clones. Every single cell would look the same. And the problem is, let's say this cell is really bad. Let's say I get one bad cell with a bad gene in it. Well, that cell just keeps on cloning itself, and then you have tons of bad cells. So that's kind of the problem with using only one cell to produce the babies of society. And then the last thing, guys, is this. Big cells are really not so great at bringing in nutrients. Okay, if you look at my picture down here, this on the left is one really big cell. And it can take in, let's say it wants to take in some food, some water, whatever. It can do that, but there isn't really too much space for the nutrients to get in. There's only those 6 sides. Now, if I look over here at this cell, holy cow, there's tons of little cubes, tons of surfaces where I can bring in nutrients. So there's more opportunity for me here to bring in nutrients than over here on the left because I have more surface exposed. That's like, think about this. When you wear your jacket in the wintertime, I know you all have jackets because you live in Chicago, you are not exposing your arms. You're exposing less skin, so you aren't as cold. But in the summertime, you're able to soak up all the sun rays because you might be wearing a tank top. Same thing here. You're trying to prevent yourself from the elements with this first one, right? You're kind of like less surface areas exposed, so you aren't going to take in as much coldness. But then if you have on, a tank top, of course you're going to get in all of the air. So it just is like more areas exposed. It means more opportunity to bring in the nutrients. Okay? Any questions on that? No? Okay. All right. So this is the big question. What was the first multicellular organism? Now, we're not talking about animals because animals are a specific subset of multicellular organisms. It's a separate group because technically, guys, plants are multicellular too. So if we're talking about the very first multicellular organism, it's SpongeBob. It's a sponge. Did anyone think it was a sponge? Anyone was thinking that and they didn't want to say it?
Thinking like, what the, me?
Yeah, right? He's very confused. So the sponge, guys, is actually a lot more complicated than it looks. The cool part about the sponge is that it has some cells in its pores, like you see SpongeBob has these little like holes. Those help to soak up water. Now there's other cells that filter out the gunk in the water. So inside of SpongeBob, there's some cells that are like, there's like a gross thing in here, we're going to kick that out. And then there's other cells that help to move the water throughout SpongeBob so he stays hydrated. That's really cool, and that's why it's multicellular, because each of those cells has a different job, right? The cells that are cleaning the water aren't the cells that are moving the water. They're different, and that makes the SpongeBob so effective, and that makes him alive, really. So the sponge had a very simple body plan. He had a couple of very hard skeletal structures that are holding up the kind of squishy exterior that you guys know of for sponges. But this is kind of our first step toward multicellular organisms. And we've come a long way from the sponge. We've become a lot more complex, but the structure, the bone structure surrounded by like a fleshy, soft exterior, when you feel your skin, is kind of like a sponge, right? There's some aspects of it that we can kind of compare to ourselves. So it's very interesting. And who would have thought that the sea sponge was so closely related to us, kind of. All right. So now we get to this really cool period. And guys, we're all building this so we could start talking about like actual animals that you guys are thinking of. We have to start at the beginning. So there was a time called the Cambrian explosion. Has anyone ever heard of the Cambrian explosion? Not yet? Okay.
Well, when explosion was when our planet was still the red, a giant planet like a rock about the size of Mars crashed down on it and made a surface. Wasn't it that?
So it wasn't necessarily like a crater or anything like that. Really, what the Cambrian explosion is, one of the theories, there's a lot of theories about why it exists and what happened. But to define the Cambrian explosion, guys, it was about 500 million years ago. So we're kind of moving forward in time. We're moving closer to modern day. But the Cambrian explosion was a time where we saw development of active creatures, animals with heads and tails, with hard body parts that allowed them to swim and see new things and try to kind of, be a predator or resist predators, either way. So animals kind of started taking bigger risks. They started to really explore their environments, and we got some really neat animals from it. Now, that when you're talking about like the crater, that might be a potential theory as to why Cambrian explosion existed or why it happened. But really, one of the most credible theories that most scientists agree with is the idea that waste products, so kind of like dead animals, whatever, when they were floating around the ocean, they usually ate up a lot of oxygen. And remember, I said oxygen, you need oxygen to produce complex animals. So there's a lot of waste in the ocean that was kind of eating up that oxygen. And something happened, they think, where those creatures or dead animals actually ended up getting buried. And when they're buried, they're not eating up as much oxygen, which leaves more oxygen in the ocean for real animals to form. So kind of those waste particles that were like eating oxygen before, whoop, they got buried. And when they're buried, then we have more oxygen to make real creatures, like new and exciting creatures. So here's an example, guys, of one of them. This is a tetrabrite, which is kind of like
Trilobite?
Trilobite. Did I say tetrabyte? I'm sorry. I was thinking of wrong prefix. Trilobite. You got it. So anyway, so trilobite right here, guys, this is similar to a kind of like a crab mollusk sort of creature. We see the legs it has is very similar to an insect, but this was definitely something we saw during the Cambrian explosion that did eventually go extinct. If you want to think about why it went extinct, I mean, there's a couple of ideas, but really it's about survival. Can these animals survive in the new types of environments that we're going through? And especially back in those billions of years ago, our environment was rapidly changing. So it really depended on that, whether, the animal like the trilobite could keep going. But here's why I'm talking about Cambrian. You might be thinking, well, this is kind of cool. And here's another one that went extinct during the Cambrian. But why is this important at all? Like, why do we care about the Cambrian? The Cambrian was important because it set up this idea of the animal kingdom and different animal kingdoms. We saw so many different types of animals that's exciting to see, okay, wow, we actually do have different forms of life that can be brought onto Earth. And that's when we start getting a little bit more specific with speciation and dividing up what types of animals we're seeing. And also, too, guys, we saw this idea of prey-predator for one of the first times. We saw animals preying on other animals to survive, and that concept is pretty unique. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the animal kingdom and what makes one species of animal different from another species. It's important to understand.
Excuse me?
Yeah,
I have a question.
Yeah.
What is that creature down there?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that a little bit. Well, I might get into that in just a second. You're going to understand why I have a big X through it. So the animal kingdom, guys, is basically how we classify every animal and every plant on Earth. Okay, the animal kingdom is pretty huge. But I don't want to say animal kingdom because there are multiple different kinds of kingdoms. There's animal kingdom, there's a plant kingdom, there's the eubacteria kingdom, the archaebacteria kingdom. There's lots of different kingdoms. But really, guys, there are 6 different kingdoms. We have the animal kingdom, which I'm sure you guys are most familiar with. We have the plant kingdom. We have the protista kingdom, and protista are really just fancy unicellular organisms. So fancy single-celled organisms. We also have the eubacteria kingdom, which that, guys, was single-celled bacteria as well. And we have the archaebacteria kingdom. And we talk about that really when we're talking about bacteria that are able to survive in super extreme conditions. They kind of fall into archaebacteria. So when I say kingdom, guys, we are looking all the way up here in this big, like, almost like a Wi-Fi box, kind of getting into the different kingdoms there. Now, the next step is the phylum. Okay, in the phylum, we have different phylum depending on the skeletal structure of the organism. So does it have a skeleton? Does it not? A jellyfish, right? Jellyfish doesn't have a skeleton, so it would kind of fall into a different category than we do. You also had respiratory, circulatory, nervous systems. Does this phylum have that, or does this phylum not have that? And that was how we started to divide up the phylums. Okay, now in each phylum, you have different classes. And classes are really just another way to start differentiating our animals. So an example of a class would be the Mammalia class, which is mammals. We'd also have the Reptila class, which is reptiles. Those would be different classes that you'd see within this Chordata phylum track. So if we were to go here.
I realized something about it.
Yeah, what did you realize?
You see, You see the one that at this side? Look, all the animals are the same on this side.
Yeah, that's actually a really good. I didn't even notice that. That's a great observation. Right. So it's showing you how we keep narrowing this down and pulling from this really big family into smaller chunks that explain why we look different from a dog, right? So after classes, guys, it doesn't stop there. We keep going. Then we have orders, okay? And these are orders. That's down here. And an example of an order would be carnivora, which meat eaters. Primates are an order. Those are all orders.
Where are the dinosaurs?
Yeah, dinosaurs, they would be with the, so if we wanted to, we can keep go back. They'd definitely be an animal kingdom, most certainly. They're multicellular. We have to kind of look at some of their qualifications, but they would fall into that mammalia category. So they're pretty close, or I'm sorry, mammalia class. So if we look at class here, trying to find the mammal. Yeah, so you kind of be over here, mammalia class. And then for orders, they would be in, depends on it. If it would be in carnivora, if you're talking about Tyrannosaurus Rex, then we'd fall into carnivora. So that's kind of how we'd start breaking things down. And then when you get even more specific, you're looking for smaller details.
Wouldn't they be in reptilia because they're reptiles?
Let me think about this for a second. I thought that the T-Rex was mammal, but I'll double check on that for you. I might be wrong on that.
The T-Rex is not a
I
mammal.
think it's a reptile because dinosaurs are like lizards.
Like scales.
I think though, I'm sure maybe I'm thinking of the wrong dinosaur. There is a dinosaur. I'm trying to think what it was. I thought there was one dinosaur that was mammalia, but I might be wrong on that. I'll double check for
all the dinosaurs were mammals because dinosaurs, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, they're cold. Well, that first of all, but I'm pretty sure dinosaur is like Tyrannosaurus. It's like big lizard. So pretty much all of them. No, all of the dinosaurs are reptiles. The other no, there are no bird dinosaurs. They're flying reptiles that lived during the dinosaurs age, but they're not dinosaurs. They're just flying reptiles.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. You know what? Here's why I'm confused though. I get what you're saying.
There is one bird dinosaur. It looks like it sort of looks like what was it that fast velociraptor with two like horny wings with two wings with like 3 feathers on each wing.
You're not thinking pterodactyl, are you?
No.
No, that dinosaur.
Yeah, the
Velociraptor you're talking about?
Yeah, he's talking about velociraptor because they had feathers and like, yeah. But I stumbled because I said the velociraptor instead of the velociraptor.
You're good. You're all good. I'm thinking about your dinosaur because you know what? Now I'm questioning because I'm thinking about our track, right? And especially T-Rex was carnivorous, right? That was like one of the pivotal. Everyone's like, oh, it's a carnivore, but carnivora is only, I think, found on the animal the mammalia track, which is kind of confusing. So I want to dig a little bit deeper into that and understand why. Because if right,
it could be the Troodon. That's a feathered dinosaur too.
That would be feathered dinosaur. But I'm thinking about T-Rex, and if it falls into reptilia, then what would its order be, right? Because orders, that's like carnivora.
Scientists think that the T-Rex also had feathers.
Do they? I heard about that. I don't know if I believe that. That seems a little far-fetched to me. But maybe, I don't know. I'm not a scientist, but that definitely does seem a little, I don't know. Because I can't quite understand why they need the feathers. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yes, but why is there that goat with the X on it?
Okay, yes, I was sorry, I was off track. I was thinking about dinosaurs. I haven't done dinosaurs in a while. but now that you guys brought it up, that would be kind of a cool lesson to do for next time. Is I have to refresh on my dinosaurs. But anyway, so next step, guys, is our families. And families, if we were in carnivora, which we are, it would be felinae, which are felines. You'd also get canidae, which are dogs. Those are going to be called our families. So not all dogs are the same, though. So that's why we start getting a little bit more specific. Then your next step is going to be the genus. And these are animals that are very similar to each other. An example would be the felis, which is like a small cat. You'd also get panthera, which is like lions and tigers. So within each of those families, you start getting into genuses. And then the last one would be our species, and that's all the way down here. This is when we're getting super specific, and it's the most specific you can get. So right here, guys, does anyone know what this actually is? What kind of dog this is? Canis familiaris?
Golden Retriever.
Yes. This is a Golden Retriever, exactly. No, actually, this is a Labrador Retriever, not Golden Retriever. So slightly different. Actually, that would be a different species, slightly. So this is a Labrador Retriever. Yeah, so it's just kind of interesting to see kind of how we name these animals, because they usually have very long and kind of drawn out names, where you would just call it a Labrador Retriever. It's actually Canis familiaris, if you want to be specific. So now here, let's get down to this half ram, half man. What differentiates species and what makes one species different from another has to do with reproduction. And two animals of the same species will be able to mate, and they'll be able to produce healthy babies.
Wait, but I've heard of things called hybrids, you know, like dolphin mating with the shark, and like tigers with lions make ligers, and lions with tigers.
Yeah. I mean, I have to be honest with you, a lot of that, like ligers and stuff like that, a lot of it's kind of, you have to be careful. I think a lot of that is a little bit of tall tale, some of it. You may be able to if the species are close enough. And again, it depends on if they're able to mate, but if the babies are able to be healthy, right? You might not know the life expectancy of like a liger. It might be really short. So that's kind of a big factor to think about is, okay, if they can mate, what is the outcome of the child? So typically mating between species, like interspecies mating, as opposed to like within your own species, it usually isn't successful. And that's why, I mean, there's some animals, I guess shark and dolphin, kind of close, but still I don't think that the offspring would probably be super viable. They probably wouldn't be able to live a long time, or as long as just a normal shark would be able to live. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So those are just kind of some of the things about our animal kingdom. I want to go over, talk about what species are, but there's definitely some advantages to being multicellular, and we're going to actually do a little experiment examining multicellularity. Okay, so right here I have a couple of things. I have these are just regular glasses of water. And this experiment, even though there are no animals involved, this definitely does tie to the lesson today. So you guys will like this. So I'm gonna move my rearrange here. So 2 glasses of water. And I have Alka-Seltzer tablets. Do you guys know anything about Alka-Seltzer? Have you heard of it before?
No.
You usually take this if your stomach hurts, if you need some, they even have one for like cold and flu. But really what these are antacid tablets. So what that means is that they kind of bubble when we put them in water. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open these up. I have 2 of them. And I'm going to take one in its whole form and drop it in. And the other Alka-Seltzer tablet, I'm going to take it, put it in here in this my little cup here. I'm going to crush it with the end of a spoon. Okay. I'm going to break it up until we get about a fine powder, really. So I'm just going to start kind of whacking it a little bit, breaking it up till I get this nice powder. Any more questions while I'm breaking this up? What we did today? Not perfect, but this definitely is a powder. Let me show you how much I broke it up here so you guys can see it. Okay, as opposed to this whole tablet. Okay, we have two different forms, exact same product. So what I'm going to do is in one of my jars, I'm going to put the whole tablet, and the other one I'm going to put the all broken up one. And what we're watching for is how long does it take to stop bubbling? These things are going to bubble like crazy, and we're going to watch them bubble, and then we're going to wait until it stops. We're going to see which one stops first. So here we go. I'm going to do it at the same time. Here's my whole, here's my crush. Ready? Go. Okay. So one thing I noticed right off the bat, guys, is this is really, pretty. If I bring it a little bit closer here, this one is definitely pretty much almost done, right? There's tons of bubbles, but there really is very little pebble that I see. And this guy, we still have a whole tablet that's going in here. You can see it. That's a tablet. So this definitely one is definitely less clear than the one on the left side, the one with all broken up.
Excuse me?
Yes.
Can you do that with color tablets?
You can, but you just have to make sure it's a bubbling sort of tablet. As long as the tablet has some sort of bubbling mechanism, you should be okay. So if you have like a polydent, you can probably use that too. Just something it has to bubble. So guys, this one's pretty much done bubbling. I don't hear any sizzling from this one. The one with the whole tablet is still sizzling, and there's a little bit of sizzle on the top. Okay, so here the bubbles have kind of stopped. And here the bubbles are moving a lot faster. Okay. Any hypothesis? Does anyone know why this is happening?